So we'll get half the class included.
Oh, boo.
All right, Gail?
Oh, I was just going to say the archaeology tells us that the people combined. Actually, they didn't just take the land and we took a lot from the Canaanites too. We
Yeah.
a lot of our
Practices.
psalms and different things and practices came from the Canaanites. So we did combine. Regardless of what the Torah says.
But
So,
getting
wait,
to Christi,
wait. Can you expand on that? I mean, it's a really good point. So, but can you give us a little more? Can you give us a little more detail?
Well, that we've looked at the bones. We've looked at that there's really not much difference, and in fact, we think that
they're the
that
same people.
yeah, and it was a combination that even though the Torah says one story that we were probably actually the same people, and it was amount of time that we actually combined with each other and exchanged stories and civilization, and it maybe not have just been a bloody massacre like was written later, because this story was written later, much later than it actually happened, for probably a different purpose, probably a purpose of wanting to make a kingdom, to make a kingdom, the story of David, the story of, for a different reason.
Can I add to what Gail just said, because I really like it? And the relationship between settled people and pastoralists is very amicable usually, because they exchange the goods that they have. So that fits in with, they're coming into this area of Canaan, which has agriculture, clearly, with the grapes. But they have the flocks. And so that would make sense. Intermarry, so you don't have to carry on trade. It's all in the family.
Yeah. Yeah.
But getting back to Christine's comments on why is God so intolerant, I guess is one way I look at it. And he was intolerant with Moses too. I mean,
Yeah,
Moses getting
exactly.
angry the second time, sure, it was in his nature, but he hit the rock because he was tired of a bunch of, whiny Israelites complaining about stuff that he really didn't have control over, because Marion had just, Marion had just died, and give me a break, and it just it's the 40 years that always stumps me, because, and then of course all of this assumes that there is this anthropomorphic God that we're talking about, who's kind of micromanaging the day-to-day events on earth, and that's a bigger topic. So anyhow, I like to get up every morning and think I can do better, and I don't have to wait 40 years before I
Sooner or later, 40 years becomes an unattainable goal.
Yes, thank you, Rabbi.
Well, at my age, it is.
Did you raise your hand, or did you just move it? Okay, Mackenzie, I thought you'd raised your hand. All right, so let's
I think Ed has his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Ed.
I don't see a hand up. Anybody want
Ed.
I see his hand up and he's talking, but he's muted. Ed, you're muted.
That'll explain it. Yeah, so
Good.
I've read many other sacred books, and to me the fascinating thing about this book, which we share, is its reality. Other sacred books talk is more idealistic. It's on Mount Olympus, or it's mythical. It doesn't have real cities and real places and real land, and it's not. There's a brutality in this book, and God seems to be involved in it. It's fascinating to me that someone would write this fantastic book with real people and real stuff in it. And how do we understand this God, this Hashem? How do we understand this in this interaction with people? But to me, it's just always fascinating. I don't have any answers for this, but I think there's a real struggle going on. And you can't just say, oh, it's what people did back then. There is a program here that's going on, and we don't understand it. It's way beyond us. And how that works out in the plan, we don't know. We don't understand miracles. Someone was telling a story about the guy in the flood. The other was about these two men walking in the woods, and they come across this clearing. And the one says, oh, look at how everything is here. There's all in order. The flowers are cared for. There must be a gardener somewhere. The other man says, no, it all happened by chance. Oh, there's no answer to that. It's a faith thing. That somehow, despite this brutality, that somehow God has a purpose in these actions that he allows.
So
Now, shut up.
that story comes from an article going back to at least the 70s by a guy named John Wisdom. It's the only
Yeah,
thing I know by him.
yeah, I have the book.
The article is called Gods.
Yeah,
And the point goes beyond what you said, and it's really it's a significant contribution to the philosophy of religion. He says basically that because of, and I've been a long time since I read the book, the article. He says because of our current historical conditions, we can't expect to put forth proofs of God's existence that mirror the classical proofs of God's existence, and expect them to be excuse me, expect them to be perfect proofs of God's existence. Our reason won't permit that anymore. So the way these days you have to argue about God, he says, resembles more like what goes on in a courtroom. You um, you gather the preponderance of the evidence and you argue one way or the other, but unless it's a Perry Mason TV show and the murderer stands up and says, I did it, I hated his guts. Um, the jury makes a decision. It's on the preponderance of the evidence, and not with the kind of certainty that you get when you solve a mathematics problem, for example. So I mean, what Ed said was right, but it's even stronger. It's a really stronger statement about how we understand who the divinity is. Anyway, I used that article in the first serious Jewish philosophy paper I ever wrote. That's why I know it so well, from going back to 1976. All right, let's push on, because I want to get to the other story, and think. Well, I did that wrong. Where are we? Back to the Zoom. All right. So early the next morning, their fighting force set out toward the crest of the hill country, saying, we're prepared. We changed our mind. It's okay, God. We're going to do it. And we are prepared to go up to that place that Yahweh has spoken of, for we were wrong. But Moses said, why do you transgress God's command? This will not work. This ain't going to work. Don't go up, lest you be routed by your enemies, for Yahweh is not in your midst. For the Amalekites and the Canaanites will be there to face you, and you will fall by the sword, inasmuch as you have turned from following Yahweh, and Yahweh will not be with you. Yes, yet defiantly they marched toward the crest of the hill country, though neither Yahweh's Ark of the Covenant nor Moses stirred from the camp. So they were doing, and that the point of that last clause is to say, God is not on their side.
Can't
They don't
do it
have the Ark of
alone.
the Covenant, and Moses isn't with them. It's somebody said something.
No, I just said, well, you can't do it alone. And if you don't have the ark, you're really doomed.
Yeah. And the Amalekites and the Canaanites who dwelt in that hill country came down and dealt them a shattering blow at Hormah. All right. So now let's get to the other story. This other story is a good one. They're both good ones. Let me find it. Where you go? Here we go. Okay. So Vayavo b'nei Yisrael kol ha'ida midbar tzin b'chodesh harishon vayeshev ha'am b'kadesh v'tamat sham Miriam v'tikaver sham. So this opens up with a minor incident. They arrived together they arrived in a body at the wilderness of Tzin on the first new moon. And the people stayed at Kadesh. They were hanging out at Kadesh. Miriam died there and was buried there. and the community was without water, and they joined against Moses and Aaron. So here's the situation. Again, as we've seen frequently, the text doesn't want to give us the details. You know, it's for us to think of ourselves. Miriam died, and she was buried there. You know, just a certain thing. You know, the president was assassinated and he got buried. Right? Because Miriam is a major character, and the incidental way in which her death is being described really understates it. But then it gets connected with verse number 2. The community was without water, and they joined against Moses and Aaron. So, you know, the Midrash writers, the commentators say, well, what is the connection between the death of Miriam and the fact that the community is out of water? Why is this the first time we've heard that the community is out of water? And the Midrashic reply is that Miriam was the source of the water. And I'm sure I've described this before here. I know it's one of my favorite things to describe because it's so interesting. The Midrash, the rabbinic tradition, or some element of the rabbinic tradition. The rabbinic tradition is very far and very wide, very high and very wide. That we know Miriam in 3 ways that come to mind. And if I'm forgetting one, somebody please fill in. The first is that she's in the water when Moses is being sent down the river, down the Nile, and she's in the water taking care of Moses, to keep an eye on Moses. And when Pharaoh's daughter picks up the basket and takes the kid out and says, you know, this must be a Hebrew child, Miriam comes out and says, I happen to have the right woman to nurse this guy. So she has this very large role right there. And it's attached to not just Moses, but to water, and the kind of magic, her participation in the magic of that moment, with this lone little covered basket, floating down the Nile, which is just so rife with symbolism. So she jumps in there. The second time is at the crossing of the sea, and after the Israelites spontaneously break out into the Song of Songs, the Song of the Sea, rather, Shirat Hayam. She comes down, and if you know the line, it's something like, Moses. We may know the line from the Debbie Friedman song. Miriam leads all the women in song. It's a shorter song than the Song of the Sea, which presumably everybody sang, but it's Miriam who leads this women's song, also associated with water. Those are 2 instances of Miriam's biography. And the third is when Moses marries a Cushite woman, which is a black woman. Moses marries a black woman, and Aaron and Miriam complain to God, and then they get punished with some kind of skin affliction, which then gets and then I don't remember if it's Moses or Aaron, or we don't know who. Somebody then says, Al na el na rafana la, the shortest prayer in the whole of the Hebrew liturgy. El na rafana la, dear God, please cure her, and she's cured. But so the rabbis go back to verse 1 and verse 2 here, and say, well, why no water? Because it was on account of Miriam's zechut, that her merit, that there was water. And they create the idea that as they wandered through the desert, a well mysteriously followed them. And from the well, the Israelites drew water. But Miriam is gone, and so is her merit, and the well is gone. So that's how you get to verse number 2 in the mind of the Midrash. And that fellow Yitz I mentioned a few minutes ago, he was raised Orthodox, and whenever I would study Torah with him, he could not separate the rabbinic interpretation from the text itself. And I usually try to do that. In this case, I think the Midrash is so powerful, even though it's not there literally in the biblical text. I'm willing to say, yeah, Miriam died, the well dried up. The well dried up. Certainly they were in grief. The text doesn't say anything about it, but how could they not be in grief? And how could Moses and Aaron in particular not be in grief at the death of their sister. All right, did somebody have something to say? I thought. Okay. So the people quarreled with Moses, saying, if only we'd perished when our brothers perished at the instance of the Lord. And maybe there's one specific instance. I'm not going to look in a commentary to see that, but there's so much perishing going on that they can take their pick as to what instance of the Lord they should have perished with. We should have died, you know. Elijah the prophet, when he's afraid and hungry and thirsty, I want to die. I want to die. It seems to be a Hebrew predilection to want to die in the face of trouble. Why have you brought the congregation into this wilderness for us and our beasts to die there? Why did you make us leave Egypt to bring us to this wretched place, a place with no grain, which we had in abundance in Egypt, or figs, same there, or vines? We drank to our heart's content. We made this great wine back there, Moses. Why'd you make us give that up? And pomegranates, those delightful little jewels, little things that we chew on every morning. There's not even water to drink. Moses and Aaron came away from the congregation to the entrance of the tent of meeting, and they fell on their faces again, falling on their faces. Their noses have little scars on them because they're falling. So the presence of Yahweh appeared to them. Yahweh spoke to Moses saying, okay, now you got to pay attention because now the story gets thick. You and your brother Aaron take the rod and assemble the community, and before their very eyes, order the rock to yield its water. Now, the word, I've got to double check here in the Hebrew. Dibartem, mainly that usually means speak to them. Assemble the community, and before their very eyes, order the rock to yield its water. Thus you shall produce water for them from the rock and provide drink for the congregation and their beasts. So the task seems simple, and note that the task is given simultaneously to Aaron and Moses. Not one isn't selected over the other. Go to the rock and say, "Oh, please, Mr. Rock, please, Mr. Rock, give forth water." So that's the setup. God is saying, I'm sorry about the well, guys, but that is there only because Miriam, and now she's gone. But here's a rock. You get water out of this rock. Shall we get water out of a stone? Goes the saying, and the answer is yes. Vayikach Moshe et hamateh melifnei Adonai ka'asher tzivahu. And Moses took his staff from before God as he had been commanded. I don't know why it had to be put in. I don't know why it had to be put in the passive tense. This is just a translation issue. Ka'asher tzivahu means as he commanded him, and I don't see any reason why it had to be translated into the passive voice. But never mind. Moses and Aaron assembled the congregation in front of the rock, and he said to them, Shimuna Amorim, Hamin Hasela Hazen Notzi Lechem Mayim? Listen, you rebels, shall we get water for you out of that rock? And Moses raised his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod. Out came copious water. And how much water is copious? A lot of water. And the community and their beasts drank. Time passes, everybody's thirst is sated, the canteens and the jars are all filled. There's a little, since they're in wandering mode, they even built a little lake and it's filled with water. The kids can go swimming. But Yahweh said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust me enough to affirm my sanctity in the sight of the Israelite people, therefore you shall not lead this congregation into the land that I have given them. These are the waters of Meribah. It's a pun. And it's the name of a place, but it also means waters of confrontation, meaning that there is a quarrel. Meaning that the Israelites quarreled with Yahweh, whose sanctity was affirmed through them. one more verse. From Kadesh, Moses sent messengers. No, that's the end. That's the end of the story. It's a short story, but the answer is not a short answer. Why were Moses and Aaron punished? What did they do that justified that they couldn't go into the promised land? Christine.
They were taking credit for something which God did.
What do you mean?
Well, they said, "Shall we bring the water out from this rock? Shall we?" And then they don't say, "God has said we can bring water out of this rock." They're just self-aggrandizing.
So let's look at that verse again. You took us to the end of the story. You are the reincarnation of that 13th century, 14th century sage Moses Nachmanides. That's his.
I like
Actually,
you.
it's actually not his commentary, but he cites it in the name of somebody else, and I don't remember who the other person is. Let's pick it up here. All right, I'm going to read the Hebrew just for fun. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe el Aaron, Ya'an lo he'amantem bi, Ya'an lo he'amantem bi, lahakadisheni l'einei b'nei Yisrael, lachein lo taviu et kahal hazeh el haaretz asher natati lechem. Inasmuch as you did not he'amantem bi, trust me, you did not express belief in me, faith in me, trust in me. Because of that, you failed to lahakdi sheni le'enei b'nei Yisrael. You did not sanctify me in the sight of the Israelites, and therefore you ain't going across the river, boys. Can anybody just pick up on that theme just a little bit? Sherry, is that your hand? What do you have to say? What's on your mind?
I just wondered if God meant that they did not give God credit,
Exactly.
didn't sanctify him, which is kind of obvious in the statement. But maybe that's what it means.
Motzi lechem mayim min hasela, and I'm not sure that's the exact quote. Shall we? And by the way, note, I'm not going to bring the screen share up. You'll have to take my word for it. That sentence is not attributed to either Moses or Aaron, and I like the anonymity of it. They could have been saying it simultaneously, one or the other, but they're both culpable. God holds them both culpable, even though one person might have said it, and we don't know who that person is. Jane.
Well, isn't it? Oh, sorry. Isn't it because he struck the rock twice and those weren't in the instructions?
Well, that's
what I was always told.
Jane, I'm gonna. All right, so because whoever told you that read Rashi, they didn't read Nachmanides.
Okay, sorry.
The Rashi answer is, yeah, he struck the rock, and he wasn't told to hit it. He was just told to speak to it.
Yeah.
Instead, he gets all the grief of the sister and the complaining of the people and the heat, and the refrigerator broke down, and they got to buy new tires. It all just sort of just really filled him up, and in a rage he hits the rock twice. So what does Nachmanides say? Nachmanides says, "Nishka felich." It doesn't matter. How is it? Is it less of a miracle because the rock had to be hit rather than spoken to? If in hitting the rock, he was unplugging a pipe, that's a different story. It was a bit of plumbing work, but the argument that's the usual argument, and don't think you're saying anything foolish. That's the usual point. That's the obvious point. You got to look at the word that you failed to. You lo he'amanti bi, you did not sanctify me.
Right.
And the sanctification was not, Nachmanides argues, in the striking, but in attributing to themselves, Hanotzi, shall we bring forth water from the
Yes, I got that point. That's a good point.
and if I don't have to give another example. That's Nachmanides' point. When I read it, I did a curriculum, a high school, I did an adult ed curriculum with this story. So I once looked at all the commentary, well, not all of them, but I looked at the commentaries. And I found the Nachmanides point to be persuasive. All right, Jane, I think you and then Harvey.
Okay.
Right.
Aren't Moses and Aaron acting towards the Israelite community now the same way, the same impatient way that God was in the former passages that we read? Isn't it that same kind of impatience, that same, Jesus Christ, it's 40 years and you're still complaining, does this ever end? Wham! And he's hitting the rock because he wants to hit them. I mean, it's a substitution thing.
Although, he didn't, someone, I think it's in Exodus, he does see to it that a Sabbath stick gatherer is executed on Shabbat. So he has it in him.
Mhm.
Uh,
But by this time, I would be so fed up with B'nai Yisrael. I mean, this is the second generation. They've learned to cope with the desert. They've learned to live in the desert. They're not supposed to be imitating their fathers and grandfathers from the first generation. And here it is again. I mean, I would be so pissed off. I mean, it's just like a class that refuses to learn. No matter how many times you say the same thing and you cast it in different scenarios, they're just not getting it.
Harry?
I would just follow up with Christine and Ed's point. This was revelatory to me, and I had always understood that the issue was about hitting the rock, reading the text. That's immaterial. That has nothing to do with it. The issue is not giving God credit, and that's for the punishment. There's nothing in here about hitting the rock being problematic.
Yeah. The failure to sanctify is couched, well, Christine already said this, is crouched in that in their anger, they excuse me. One of the lesser arguments, I believe it was Ibn Ezra's argument, because Ibn Ezra has this connection to medieval philosophy, that the spiritual connection between Moses and God snapped at that moment because Moses was so angry. And so he not only, if you follow this and combine it with the Nachmanides interpretation, Moses not only verbally dissed God in this moment, but actually spiritually had disconnected from God. I like that. It humanizes Moses. And I'm not sure what it does about God, but yeah. All right, so it's another ripping good yarn, and we learned something. And again, these Israelites, my God, they're such fetches.
In the ass.
Do you think, Rabbi, that if he had done it privately, there would have been a different reaction? I think the fact that he did it in front of the entire community
Yeah,
was an extra added factor.
That's exactly right. You're all going, and think about this in terms of the world that Moses encountered when he went to Pharaoh's court.
Mhm.
10, however long ago it was, and there were sorcerers and magicians there who had limited powers according to the text. Right? They could turn, when Moses turned a staff into a snake. They said, we can do a bigger snake. And so here, I mean, here. You follow this line up, as is often the case, we don't have enough verbal material to see what the text really is saying. But in light of the golden calf incident, which was not that long ago, the idea the Israelites, who are not that smart, could be sitting there saying, "Oh, look what they did! They did that all by themselves. Just by doing that." And suddenly Yahweh disappears. Yahweh, it's really easy anywhere and at any time for Yahweh to disappear. And that's part of it. So now, there's a kind of a follow-up to this, but I wonder if anybody has any further comments.
I have one more, and this is kind of an adolescent argument, that when God gives the instructions to Aaron and Moses, there's nothing in the instructions about giving God credit either. If you and your brother take the rod, assemble community before their eyes, you order the rock to yield its water, thus you shall produce water for them. So they could make the argument, we did what we were told.
Well, I think that's a really good point. And I have, my response is kind of in the language of the text, rather than, I mean, one answer is, well, of course God could say that. You do this because you're my human agent. But don't forget, don't ever forget where your power comes from. Now I just lost my train of thought. Give me a second here. I'm sorry, it's gone. I beg your pardon. I mean, something about God. Oh no, I know. Here's the extension of that. I once attended a dinner, Shabbat dinner, and somebody stood up to give a Devar Torah on this parsha, and he said, "All right, they're getting punished, but how old is Moses at this point? Within a year, you know how old he is within a year. He's getting up there. This 120, right? How old is he?
120.
He's hovering around 120 years old. We don't know when his birthday is exactly, but he's up there. And that's how old he is when he dies. And Aaron is older, we assume. When Aaron appears on the scene, he just appears. God is placating Moses, and he says, all right. This is at the burning bush. Moses says, I can't do this. He said, all right, your brother's coming. So that's the first we hear of a brother. And I've always assumed he's the older brother, but not necessarily. It's logical, though, because the older brother, the brother to have survived Pharaoh's decree, had to have been born before the decree was made. So that's why I always assumed Aaron was the older brother. 120 years old, I don't want to make an analogy about the debate the other night, but it comes to mind inevitably that when you're 120 years old, even though at the end of the book of Deuteronomy it says his step was strong and his mind was strong, and he still could mix a wicked martini. 120, he's slow. Not only is he slow, but he's totally of the old world. When he was of the old world before entering Canaan, that he was perfect. He was the perfect leader. And that's, of course, how Moses Maimonides sees him anyway, the perfect philosophical leader of these people. But when time comes to cross over, they need new leadership. Now, one of the problems with what they get is Joshua. He's no spring chicken either. He's got to be, he's an adult at the time of the giving of the Torah. So this is 40 years later.
Kind of Joe Biden's age.
Yeah, I just wanted to make an allusion to it. I didn't want people to start weeping. There'll be time for that.
I'm going to have to leave. If there's another class following all this, I'm notified of it, I might show up. Might
All right.
even bring someone with me.
Well,
So thank you very much. God bless you, Rabbi, and I hope to keep in touch with you.
yeah, if there is one, and there should be, it won't be till August at the earliest, but I'll make sure you're on the list.
Okay, thank you very much.
Good. So you're going to continue with Torah study on Saturday?
Yeah. Since I got to know some of you and kibitzing with Jane and having a good time, and it's a good time for me. So, a way to keep my Hebrew up. Thank you very much.
Where did you learn the Hebrew?
What's that?
Where did you learn the Hebrew?
Well, I knew some before I met you, but you really ramped it up quite a bit. And I still teach from that same book when I teach it.
Okay, well, you have a good day, all right? Have a good
Okay,
day.
thank you, all of you.
So,
Bye.
so it was time for Moses to die. Moses had to die. And this becomes the mechanism whereby he's prohibited from crossing over to the promised land. Another good story. And one of the things I like about this, since I think Nachmanides' interpretation is really persuasive, it's not, you got when he forces the reader to look closely at the Hebrew and not just what Moses does. And the language, there are two pieces. This is what I know. This is what I was going to say before. So let me bring this up. So Moses says to them, Shimuna hamorim hamin hasela hazen notzi lechem mayim. He says, so listen up, you rebels, you. To an expression I don't think Moses uses in any other time. Hamin, and then this is a rhetorical question. Hamin hasela hazen notzi lechem mayim. Is it from this rock that we should bring forth water for you? And then he hits the rock. And then again, this is what God says. And this is what you have to pay attention to in order to find credible that the sin was not in hitting the rock, but in but the tone and the language in which Moses or Aaron challenged the Israelites. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe el Aharon, Ya'an lo ha'amanti bi, l'haktisheni le'enei b'nei Yisrael. Inasmuch as you did not have faith in me, trust in me, and in so doing, sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel. You failed to sanctify me. And I'm pausing because, if Moses said to little Menachem, hey, Manny, come up here. Manny, come up here, and like when I bring the kids up to open the ark, right? Moses says to Manny, you hit the rock. And if Manny says what Moses says, again, for the second time, Nishkafelech, who cares? It's a little kid. But it's Moses and Aaron with their power of leadership. It's that as much as what they said, because they had an impact on the part of the people. Again, Manny said that, who cares? Moses and Aaron said, "Should we draw water from you from the?" And I'm talking on and on, but I think that's an interesting secondary point. I saw your hand, Betsy. Just give me a second. Okay.
I wanted to make the comment that, once again, we see God at his harshest here, just as he's been with the Israelites through the desert in the way that he treats Moses here. But I do love the fact that, we're seeing one side of God. I do love the fact that the Midrash writers could not tolerate leaving Moses in this loss of God's love, loss of his beloved, being a beloved of God. And that the Midrash writers, when Moses dies, he's not abandoned by God. He dies with a kiss. And I think that's a really beautiful part of the tradition, that there are multifacets to God, and mercy and love and kindness is there too. And even if the Torah doesn't always have it, other parts of the tradition bring it in. And I think that this is a very, Moses could have been punished. He could have died like Miriam. And there is a very only brief sentence in the Torah about how he dies. But I just find it very compelling that the Midrash writers ended his life with such a beautiful story of his relationship to God.
Yeah. Yeah, all of creation, from the rocks and the sand and the trees and the birds and the animals and the people and the Israelites and Moses himself all protest Moses's impending death. God says, gotta go, and he gives them a kiss. That's a really beautiful image. One of those stories that's so pungent, it attaches in my head at least to the Torah text, and then I have to separate. Then I have to remind myself to separate the Torah text from the rabbinic text. Anything else? Well, you're wondering. Go ahead.
I have questions.
Oh, go
Are
ahead,
you-
Melissa.
Thanks, Jane. Are you going to, in the fall, let us know if you're going to have Torah study, because just because you went away doesn't mean we're not electronically connected. And these have been it's been very nice to get to know Betsy and you, and it's been very nice to get to know our fellow Torah students. So
Yeah, it's what I'm considering. There will be a Shabbat morning Torah class. It's part of what I drag around with me around the country. I might test drive it sooner than the fall, but certainly by September, I'll do something, and I'll let you know. And if Rabbi Gunther doesn't, if this is not part of his bag of tricks, and you want to join me, I'll be happy to.
Gershon, not Gunther.
Yeah, Gershon.
Yeah.
You have our emails?
Yeah, I do.
Cool, very good.
Yeah.
Enjoyable. It's learning a lot.
Well, I enjoy the teaching and the comment. You guys are among the most among the sharpest questioners and answerers that I've ever taught on a Shabbat morning. So, keep it up. Be happy to keep it up. And meanwhile, you keep it up by yourselves. The Torah, the Torah dibra b'lashon. How's it go? Torah dibra b'lashon b'nei adam. The Torah speaks in the language of people. It's meant to be comprehensible without a rabbi teaching you. So Shabbat Shalom, Shavua
Shabbat
Tov,
shalom.
and
Shabbat Shalom.
Safe travels.
Bye, shalom.
Yeah.
Shabbat
Gonna
shalom.
miss you guys.
Yeah, we'll miss you. Safe
Yeah.
travels.
And remember, Northern California isn't the desert.
That's for sure.
Come visit,
There
and
are
you
lots
can
of grapes
always,
up there.
yeah, don't be afraid. Come visit, and you all have Phil's contact information, or can get it from the office anytime if you need mine for any reason. So thanks.
Very kind.
We will miss you guys. We will
We're
miss
gonna
you
miss
both.
you tons. Just tons. All
Yeah.
right.
Learned a
Thank
lot
you.
this year.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Safe travels.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Shek.
Shabbat
Safe trip.
shalom. Jerry, thanks for picking me up yesterday.
all right. Cheerio.